Now it's time to get our motor prepped for installation. Now I have seen myself, and I'm sure probably if you've done any homework, you've seen yourself, where guys get their engine kit and then they bring the engine home and then they disassemble it to check the factory's work. I'm not going that far. I never do. If that engine has a problem because of something they did or did not do, I will return it and get another motor. But something I do always do, and you should do, is check all the nuts and bolts on the engine before we assemble it on the bike. It fights all the aggravation, because sometimes I find that the bolts that hold the case together aren't quite tight, or the head bolts and nuts are not quite all the way tight. Same thing with the intake. And then I go out and try to start it. It has an air leak, has a problem. And rather than fight that after the fact, I would like a nice clean start, a nice clean run. So I personally go over this part before I install it. And I suggest you do also. These we don't have to check because we don't have the exhaust on, obviously. But I will check my intake bolts. This one has bolts and not studs and nuts. And as you can see, they could use a little snugging, because if they're not tight, you may have an air leak in the very beginning. You don't have to severely put pressure on it. Just make sure that everything is snug. And now I will move over to these case bolts. These are the bolts that keep the case from leaking oil and air and keeps the case together. As you can see, the factory snugged them but did not tighten them all the way. So we want those tight. We don't have to check these because we'll be removing these to install our chain, so no need to mess with those. But we do have cover on this side we could check. As you can see right out of the box, they could all use a little tightening. Keeps the water out of my clutch system when it's snug and tight with the new gasket. Two more bolts up front to keep my case tight. See, that one's not completely tight, because a couple of the bottom ones you might not be able to get to, and who wants to do it on the bike? So we'll finish that up. This prep only takes a couple minutes, no big deal. And then I will check to make sure my mag cover is tight, is in addition to. Okay, now there's no guesswork to be had there. Now on your head nuts, and some people have the complete one cylinder, so you have to get the super long Allen wrench to reach way down in that hole and tighten them. This engine does not, but I will give them just a quick check on the bench, because I have in the past seen the nuts that weren't all the way tightened down, and then it has a head leak right from the start and doesn't start. Okay, the nuts and bolts are tight. The second step I personally do, if you look in if you could see inside the exhaust port, you'll see the piston in there. Now at the factory, they do mist them with a little lubrication, but depending how long the bike motor has sat on a shelf before you purchased it, and as you see, I pull my finger out and it's bone dry. We do not want our piston and rings going up and down inside of a bone dry cylinder. That can gall the cylinder wall immediately. Only takes about 10 feet for that one when it happens. And the bike's not going to start at all because the cylinder is gouged and it has no compression. So I personally have a little bottle of oil. It's got a little 2-cycle mixed in it, but it's just 30 weight engine oil. You could use an eyedropper or just pour it in with a cap. It doesn't hurt anything. But I give it 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Move my nozzle around to help get around the edges of the piston. And then I will roll it around just a little bit because I want the whole cylinder. I want the oil to run around the outside of the piston and get on the cylinder wall. Being as I can see in there, I don't know if the video is getting a good shot of that, but I will put a couple drops on my piston through the exhaust port. And I will also do the same thing through my intake, because the oil will roll down in there and get on the piston. So when I install my chain and spin my sprocket, the piston will go up and down, pre-lube itself before you ever get out on the street to start the bike. So it's a double win situation. I always check these because they never seem to be 100% tight. That one was pretty good, but I have had them turn a turn or two in the past. Okay, our motor is prepped and ready to install. Now we got to pick which mount and style we have to use to get it on the particular bike we're building. Now, as a safety measure, everybody has a paper towel. It is a good idea after you put your lube in there, not so the lube comes out, but so when you're installing it, no dirt, grime, or any other kind of debris should fall inside my engine. So I will stuff a napkin or a paper towel. Everybody's got a napkin or a paper towel somewhere inside my ports, just to make darn sure no dirt or anything else get in there. One last thing that you can do, and I always do, I personally use a file, but a lot of times when the intakes come, they'll have a little burr lip from where they were cut, not perfectly machined. And when you go to put your carburetor on, it kind of peels the aluminum up and puts some little shavings inside your carburetor, which could go down in your engine and cause catastrophic failure. So myself, while it's still on the bench, I will take a file with my intake plugged. I don't want any of the shavings in there. And now it's all nice and smooth. And if you can see, that's why we plug our intake up, because see the little fine shavings on my finger, a little shiny. If you don't have a file, all is not lost. You could use sandpaper. I have a personal Scotch-Brite pad. And you can just give it a little shine. And this will help you install your carburetor without any leaks. Because sometimes it's hard to get the carb on. It's not a perfect machine fit. And if this doesn't go all the way back to your carburetor, it can leak between the carburetor and the intake. And that is just annoying, because then your bike revs up all crazy and or doesn't start. Depends how close you got it. Okay, now let's take this engine over and see what system we're going to have to use on this particular bike to get it mounted. Now is when we see if we're ready and we have all the necessary parts to install our engine, which really starts to make her look good and starting to look a lot more like a motorized bicycle. Now here's where I do things a little different than most folks are able to. As you can see, they have fattened up this bar, which doesn't let these studs go next to it, and slide the engine down. In your kit, they give you a different option on how to mount your engine. It should be this little plate, which slides right on here. Then you put your nuts on here to mount it to the engine, like so. And as you can see, you may have to, after you put your nuts on, trim these studs, or use bolts instead of the studs. Remove the studs and take these out and put bolts in them, which allows this plate to sit flat against your bottom tube. Now some bikes are just so big they won't let these studs next to that at all, and some of them are smaller, so the studs are right next to it and it's an easy fit. Being I'm not with you, you have to make that decision yourself. It's just part of building a motorized bicycle. But anyway, if it does fit on your particular bike, and after you've mounted your plate to your bike, it comes with a U-bolt to secure, and slide up there, and it will secure your bike to the engine. Well, I'm just showing you, so anyway. And it will go as such, and you put your nuts and bolts on it, tighten them down equally, and that will secure your bike to your engine. Now myself, and I completely understand, and that is why I wasn't going to suggest it to anyone, but I personally put a welded motor mount on the front. 100% ensures the motor is never going to shift, move, stretch, nothing. It's going to be where it is all the time. Kind of like the aluminum bike frames that they sell for motorized bicycles, with the motor mount front welded already attached to the frame when you get it. I use the same method on this bike, which is what I'm getting ready to make the front mount for, which you'll see after I get it installed. But if you've got to this stage and you found out that this will not sit down on top of it, even if after you cut those, it all is not lost. You can Google fat tube front engine mount for motorized bicycle, and some bike companies will pop up that offer you a special mount that fits the fat tube bicycles. If you didn't order that when you got your engine kit, I'm sorry that some people didn't know that, and you're just going to have to wait for the UPS truck to bring you that mount. Unless you're able to build your own, you can use your own judgment on that. I would personally rather wait those couple days and not have any problems and not mess up my engine or my bicycle. Do it correctly and then not have any problems in the future. But I couldn't share a universal one because I do not have them. I don't carry them on my webpage. I just don't use them because I make my own in-house. So I'm going to get to that part, and we'll get this motor set on here. Okay, I hope everyone figured out their front mount and what route they're going to take. Sorry I couldn't be more clear about that, but every bike is different. I can only show you what I'm doing in front of me and what works for me. But I can hopefully share at least some information that you can get front motor mounts for different style bikes. Anyway, this is the end result I have. My motor is firmly mounted to the frame. A little friendly suggestion: I always slide a carburetor. This is a cadaver carburetor, but you could use the one in your kit that comes with your bike that you're actually going to use. You don't have to tighten it on there, but I always slide it on when I'm positioning the engine. I personally want my carburetor and engine as flat as I can get it, level, if you will. Make sure before I mount it in any specific spot that I have clearance here, so my air cleaner I can remove and install, because nothing worse than having the motor tilted a little frontwards or a little too far backwards, and then when it comes time to put your carburetor on, it doesn't fit between the bar and the intake. Then you got to loosen all that stuff up. So when I position my engine, I slide the carburetor on it, put it on the frame, see where it's most comfortable, happy medium and straight as I can get it, straight as it'll allow me, and that's where I mount the engine. Okay, having said all that, now it's time to put our chain on. So I'm going to take these 3 bolts out the rest of the way to get access to my drive gear. We're going to put the chain on and make sure it is aligned properly. and tighten our rear hub to adjust the sprocket in toward the wheel or out, whatever we need, if we need any adjustment at all. Chain installation time. We're going to pull the 3 bolts out of our clutch actuator cover. Notice where your clutch lever is, because you want to reinstall it pointed in the same direction so it's not facing front, binding up, and you can't get all the bolts in it and you're wondering why. That goes one way, and it is right about there. Okay, let's remove that little dude. Place it safely out of the way. Now, as you can see, I've already taken my chain apart, taken the master link out. I do have a video further down on my page about how to install and uninstall your master link. So I am going to, hopefully I'm not hogging up all the video with my carcass, but I'm going to stretch my chain across the top. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to remove my dust plugs for my spark plug hole and my exhaust port, because now is when the lubrication of the cylinder comes in handy. I will take my 19mm socket and I will rotate the engine, and I will do so clockwise as to not loosen the sprocket nut or drive gear nut, whatever you want to refer to it. So now my cylinder will be lubricated for when I do finally finish it and take it outside and test it and fire it up for its first time. Now, I personally feed the chain in from the bottom so I can always tighten up the nut. Fickle in the beginning, but you get the concept. And then I will finish it just as soon as I get it unkinked again, because I had too much slack. So I will finish feeding this back, and then we will check the length of the chain and shorten it if we need to. Now that I've finished running my chain through my sprocket all the way to the rear, now it's time to shorten our chain. So what we're going to do is make our chain snug with the wheel. Take the top half and lay it on the bottom half and see where we're at. Okay, now not always can you, if I can get my fingers out of the way, oily little fella. To be perfect would be able to shorten the chain to right there. But chains are a little tricky, so hopefully I can explain this to you. I can't do it on the hinge side, the half link hinge side. I have to do it on a solid link. So perfect naturally on this bike would have been on the hinge side. And the chain, I've got rid of that much chain. So move the fingers. But I'm going to have to back up a little bit, because that is a hinge side of one is where it would fit. But I'm going to have to come back to this solid link right there, so I don't lose my place. I have a marker pen for steel, but you can use any type of paint, permanent marker, hopefully a bright color, because it is a little oily, so that way when you drop it and you're fooling with it, you're like, oh, what link did I mark to do that? What one was I going to put that at? Okay, wipe that off the spoke. A little boo-boo. Now I personally have a chain breaker, so I am going to use that as soon as I find it. I'm back. I found it. Right in the safe place I laid it. So anyway, I will lay this in here, snug this up, tighten that end up, and push that pin right out of there. If you do not have a chain breaker, which a lot of people do not, that do not fool with chains on a regular basis, you can grind the head off. A little more primitive, but does work. Grind the head off of that, and if you have a small enough punch and a hammer, you can drive that little dude out to the length you need. If you don't care to go that route, you can, if you have a way to mark what pin you want taken out, you can take it to your local motorcycle shop or bicycle shop. They generally have chain breakers. So just a little friendly FYI, and if you're having problems with your chain, shortening it. Okay, well, I'm going to drive this pin out and get this chain put together. Hopefully, after whatever method you chose, chain breaker, motorcycle shop, bicycle shop, or do it yourself, grind the head off and drive out the pin, that you've ended up with something like that. The pin just pushes out that side, and what I was talking about earlier of the half link, so you wouldn't be able to put your master link on the half link. That is, I like to refer to just the old hinge link. You have to go up to the next solid one. So instead of having an end like that and no roller that you can't use anymore, you have your whole link. Notice how in the chain it is its own link. So if I moved up one and went to the half link, which is always usually the ones outside, then I would end up with this. So I would have to move up. And I always say, make the chain longer. You can always shorten it, but you can't make it grow. So if you question yourself in any way, shape, or form, make the error towards back that way. When you get your chain laid on top of each other, instead of going this way and taking a guess, I'd rather guess and come back this way and have a longer chain than a too short and can't use it anymore chain. Because it is a real tough cookie to put that link back together and not damage that link. Okay, enough about that. It's time to install our master link, which we will bring in from the back and poke it through that way. Bring this one from this way and poke it through the back this way as such. Hopefully you can get a good view of that. Put that on there. It is important when you're putting on the keeper to make sure that it always rides backwards on the chain. The mouth is always riding backwards. If you turn it this way and the chain's moving that way, there is a slight chance it could hit something in the future, knock this off, and your chain falls apart in the middle of the street and you are stranded. So if you put this on and it's always riding backwards, if it hits anything, it's always putting it on and not trying to take it off. So we are going to install that with the mouth toward the rear. If I were doing it and I was shortening the chain and putting it back together on the bottom, I would have the top facing the front of the bike. But being I am on top, I just need it to face the back of the bike. like so. All right, got rid of our excess chain that's unnecessary, and now we will move on to putting our chain tensioner pulley on our frame. Okay, we are down to our trusty chain tensioner and idler pulley. I personally snug this up before I mount it for the first time. It's easier because sometimes when it's positioned on your bike, sometimes you got to remove the chain guard to adjust it. So I just tighten it up now because I will adjust it to what the chain is right now. I put my first couple bolts in there because no use trying to fight all four and hold it. But if you just get them started, you have enough room at the bottom to slide it over top of the frame and only have to deal with two. So and I will slide my other bolts through there as such. Washer, block washer, and nut. And there you have it. Now I personally slide it back to where it is snug. I tighten this up at toward the bottom at the lowest adjustment because we'll always be adjusting up as time goes on. Our chains wear and stretch and get a little slack in them. But this is about as much slack as you want. You don't want your chain tight like a banjo string. It pulls on the back wheel, puts a little undue pressure on your rear bearings. It's just unnecessary and shortens the life of your back wheel. So when you adjust it, your end result, you want about that much play in your chain. So let me get my wrench. I'll tighten up these four and we'll see where we're at. All right, so here's where we are. Make sure you tighten up all four of your bolts really well. That is massively important. If you're doing this to a bike that has really tiny rails that you're putting that on, the tube part of the bicycle back here, I don't know the technical term for this little section from here to here, but if it doesn't seem to be gripping on there correctly, go with a different route, because I don't know what style of bicycle you at home are building. This one worked out perfect. As a matter of fact, it's gripped on there so tight that it pulled the ears down together when I put the super grips to it, because that you want definitely tight, because in the future if you slack on the maintenance and your chain gets loose, there is a minute possibility that it could get flapping around, and if the chain, as you're going down the road, walks on top of the teeth, it takes all the slack out of it immediately and really hard and tries to pull your tensioner in towards your wheel. So as an addition way to combat that, I use a steel pinned rivet through the center just as an extra precautionary measure. It is not a necessity, but it is a great precautionary measure that doesn't happen to you. Because usually if you have your chain aligned properly, your sprocket turns true, which is straight, and everything's functioning the way it should be, that is a non-issue. But the moment it has that one issue of the chain gets slack in it and nobody paid attention to it and it kept adjustment on it, when necessary, not something you got to do all the time, but as you ride and put thousands of miles on your bike, the old chain will get some slack in her and could walk up on the teeth and yank that in. So that is just a precautionary measure with the rivet. Just thought I'd inform everybody about that. I don't want that to happen to anybody. I don't personally know anybody it's happened to, but I have seen it on other people's videos, just like everybody else. I guess if you've watched videos that happened. All right. So having said that, you have come a long way on your build. Hopefully you're going step by step with me and getting her done, getting her put together. So now we are to the point of installing our chain guard. That is why this bolt is a little longer up top, because that is where your chain guard goes. Now they send you a little strip of metal with a hole in it, clip, for you to hang it on there, but I always find on every bike it doesn't work, or it's got the chain guard in my chain, or it's hanging down flopping. I just don't care to use it. So what I do is drill a pilot hole right there. Make sure you can see that. Hopefully you can see that. Sorry for the scooting. And I use a self-tapping screw. Put a tiny washer on it just so it's got a little more surface area, which drills the hole for me and holds it tight. And then I don't have to fool with the strap. I do want my kickstand on, or my chain guard on there, because I do not want a pant leg full of oil ever. Nor do I want to get anything of my clothing caught in the chain at any time. Now I'll put my nut and washer on the beginning up here, on the back side of here, and I have my chain guard. I have to confess, I did one little boo-boo that I did not share with you folks. Well, maybe 1.5. And I mean boo-boo by video, not by building. I trimmed out, if you hadn't noticed yet, the rear fender. Now I have a expensive pair of shears that I use, so I can do it on the bike. You might be able to use a hand pair of 10 snips. Or after you get your engine installed, you can position and see where your chain guard is going to go, and then take the tire off, take the fender off, trim it out, and reinstall it. But when I was doing the welding to the front motor mount, I went ahead and did this without thinking, but this is what I had cut out of the fender to give my chain clearance. Same thing with the chain guard. I had to do a little trimming on that also, right here, so it would notch and go around the frame and fit like it is. So I didn't want to feel I cheated anybody out of any information there. I did this with panel cutters, but you can do it on the bike if you have a die grinder. Little hint, the more air you push through it, at least around 100 pounds, the faster you spin the blade, the faster it cuts this without jagged edges and whatnot. So if you're doing it with an air compressor and a die grinder of that magnitude. Electric, I can't help you with. Never used an electric one, so I don't know how it would work. I'm sure it would work, but I know air around 100 pounds spins that fast enough with a die grinder to cut that, if that's what you're going to use.